When the FCC voted to repeal net neutrality, that was arguably one of the biggest stories of 2017. But when it comes to coverage of the issue of net neutrality, particularly on cable news shows, well, we've seen a lot of propaganda being done at the behest of multi-billion-dollar internet service providers. Now, that's only when you take into account cable news shows that actually talked about net neutrality, because up until this point, a lot of shows didn't even mention it as an issue. In fact, to some pundits in the mainstream media, this is a new development to them. I'm not even kidding about that.
The FCC voting along party lines 3-2 to repeal net neutrality is very significant development. Lori, a very significant development now, and we'll see how this impacts the average person out there.
Welcome to the party, Wolf. I'm so glad that you could finally join the rest of us who've been talking about net neutrality since January, when we knew that Ajit Pai would in fact be pursuing a repeal of net neutrality. So it's only a development if you haven't been paying attention, but aren't you supposed to inform the American people? So why weren't you informing the American people? If you're not informed yourself, then you shouldn't be a broadcaster. But Wolf Blitzer, not to just pick on him, because he's not the only one who has recently learned about the importance of net neutrality, because in an interview with FCC Commissioner Minion Clyburn, one MSNBC host actually couldn't figure out who was in favor of the repeal of net neutrality.
Help us understand, who is it that wants this?
Well, Stephanie, if you turn around and look behind you, you'll actually notice that there's a huge logo behind you, and that'll provide you with a hint as to who actually wants this, because Comcast, who owns the company you work for, is one of the biggest spenders when it comes to anti-net neutrality lobbying. But Stephanie isn't the only one at MSNBC who can't figure out who's behind this.
Who was really pushing this? Who was behind this?
Look behind you. But look, I don't want to be too hard on these MSNBC hosts, because they've at least come to a conclusion that net neutrality is good and they support net neutrality. But if you ask Tucker Carlson over at Fox News, well, he's so confused, he doesn't know what to think about net neutrality.
Again, I'm not even sure what I think of it, but it does seem like someone's spending a lot of money to lobby public opinion on this subject.
Oh, I can assure you, Tucker, there's a lot of money being spent to lobby someone's opinion, but it's not the public's, because anti-net neutrality lobbying is 3 times as prevalent as pro-net neutrality lobbying. So money is definitely being spent, Tucker, but not in the way you think it is. Now, you might think that Tucker Carlson is dim-witted to not reach the same conclusion as 83% of the American people, because net neutrality is a no-brainer. Who would be against it? But I honestly don't know what's worse, Tucker Carlson's indecisiveness or this next host's naivete.
We're trying to get I've been struggling to get a sort of a big picture sense of what the unintended consequences of this may be, because I'm prepared to take certain companies at their word that they're not intending to throttle back services and they're not intending to favor some services over others.
So when companies like Comcast and Verizon spend millions upon millions of dollars every single year lobbying Congress so that way they're able to obtain the power to block and throttle content they don't like, we're supposed to believe them when they tell us that they're not going to block or throttle content they don't like, even though they have a history of doing just that, and they've been pressuring Congress to give them the ability to do that? How could you possibly be that naive? I mean, why on earth would he believe what Comcast is telling them? It's almost as if he's on their payroll or something. So at this point, as you can see, there's a lot of media hosts that are just playing dumb when it comes to the issue of net neutrality, but other hosts have decided to take a different approach. Some of them have decided to just be condescending to viewers.
The move causing some on the left to paint an even dire picture with a CNN headline reading, quote, "End of the internet as we know it."
Bum, bum, bum. You silly liberals, you're just being hyperbolic. Except this isn't actually a partisan issue at all, because most conservatives actually don't have their heads stuck up their asses, unlike you, 73% to be exact, and they've realized that if Twitter is willing to kick conservatives off of their website, then what's to say ISPs won't cut off your access to conservative websites? I mean, this is a bipartisan issue because it affects everyone equally, but one conservative in particular doesn't see it that way.
Thanks for the work that you're doing to deregulate, because obviously the regulatory regimes put in place as sort of a poison pill by the Obama administration with the help of the media are not going to benefit, I think, consumers either in the short or the long run. So thanks for the hard work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Ajit Pai, for doing something that will specifically fuck me over personally. I really appreciate it. This is one of the most well-respected, quote, intellectuals on the right that's actually stupid enough to think that a company like Comcast wouldn't cut off access to his website in the event they said something Comcast deemed as hate speech, for example. So even though Twitter is willing to ban accounts from conservatives that they disagree with, Comcast would never do anything like that. They would never block the websites of conservatives they disagree with, would they, Ben? I mean, if you believe that, Ben, then I've got some snake oil to sell you. But not all of these hosts were completely dishonest, because even while some were trying to convince us that these large internet service providers like Comcast and Verizon are benevolent and they'd never block or throttle content, they'd never set up a tiered internet access system, well, some in the mainstream media just outright told us the truth. But that it was a good thing.
This is a real positive step. You know, the internet, Neil, it's not a free right. It's not a public utility. It was actually created by private companies, as the FCC commissioner alluded to. Companies that have spent billions of dollars in not only creating it, but now maintaining it. And it's theirs to control in price. And what you will see is more innovation, more tiered options, as was alluded to, and it makes sense, Neil.
This is super positive, you guys. We're finally going to see tiered internet packages. So if you want to gain access to Netflix and Hulu, you have to spend an extra $10. I can't wait. I mean, this is what he's telling you. He is trying to convince viewers that tiered internet packages is a good thing. But here's what else we can expect once the repeal of net neutrality comes into effect.
What do you think happens now?
I think actually you're going to see a great explosion of entrepreneurial brilliance.
Entrepreneurial brilliance, yes, because nothing screams innovation and entrepreneurialism like allowing a handful of companies to take control of the entire internet and literally be able to control everything we see on the internet. But according to Tucker Carlson, the internet is already like this.
A lot of people, a lot of famous people, have very strong opinions about net neutrality. They warn if it's repealed, a handful of tech companies will have total control over the internet. Wait, doesn't that already describe the status quo?
No, it does not. The companies that he's talking about might be in control of their own websites, but they don't control the totality of the internet. They don't control your access to other websites, just what you see on their website. So clearly, Tucker Carlson doesn't know what he's talking about, hence why he can't decide what he thinks about net neutrality.
I'm not even sure what I think of it.
But I actually want to get back to Neil Cavuto here, because for those of us who are worried about anti-competitive, anti-consumer conduct by these multi-billion-dollar companies, well, he assures us that we don't actually have to be worried, because there will still be one government agency that's going to look out for us, the FTC.
The FTC then would rule this type of activity as illegal. Correct. And you try it, you're in big trouble, right?
Right. The Federal Communications Commission kicked the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, off the beat in 2015.
Right.
Now the FTC is back on the beat.
Except, aren't you forgetting one really important fact, Neil? The FTC can only take action in the event these companies don't disclose that they are throttling other websites. So as long as they're upfront about it and they include one sentence in their terms of service that nobody will see about how they're going to throttle certain websites, then there's nothing the FTC can do. And even if the FTC wanted to take action, they don't have the power to do so. They're not capable of enforcing net neutrality like the FCC is, which means the internet will no longer be free and open, despite what these two liars tell you. Now, even if you think that net neutrality is important and that a free and open internet is important, well, as Neil Cavuto is going to explain here, the problem is that net neutrality, it just hurts investment.
I do remember the internet alive and well and thriving up to 2015 when net neutrality came into being. And I do remember that since it did come into being, all the big boys started cutting back on infrastructure expansion and the like. It was building and increasing every year. Since then, it's been going down.
That's a nice talking point that you're using from the telecom industry, Neil, but the fact of of the matter is that the big boys all actually increased investment after net neutrality rules went into effect in 2015. Yeah, you heard me right. They increased investment. As Ars Technica reports, in December of 2015, AT&T told investors it would actually increase investment after net neutrality passed. Comcast spent a total of $7.6 billion on investment in 2016. So that means after net neutrality passed, they spent more than ever. Verizon also increased investment by 3.1% overall after net neutrality passed. Charter's CEO told their investors that Title II didn't actually hurt them at all. So if you seriously remember that all of the big boys in the industry were investing up until 2015, then you need to see a psychiatrist because you're delusional, Neil. Now, when it comes to all of these pundits in the mainstream media, if they're not just outright lying about net neutrality like Neil Cavito was doing here, then they're being really disingenuous and framing the argument in a way that misleads viewers. So, in one example from CNN, they tried to paint this as a war between large multi-billion-dollar corporations that didn't actually involve the American people.
I've covered technology. You look at the tech companies who have been very outspoken about the stakes here. You've had the telecom industry in favor of this. For a long time, they've said that the current regulations, get in the way of daily business, that they're stifling innovation, which you heard a little bit about. But you have the tech companies on the other end who say that, this gives internet providers too much power, too much control over the way online content is delivered. It creates a tiered internet.
So at face value, what they're saying probably doesn't seem that problematic, but their framing of this issue is in fact problematic, because if viewers watch that segment and they think that this is only a battle between Comcast and Google, then what's the implication? Well, they'd think, well, this is a battle that they're having and it doesn't actually concern me. But the real way to frame this story, because it's accurate, is this is about internet service providers like Comcast, Verizon, and AT&T and the American people. They want to be able to control what we see on the internet. Just because Google and Facebook support net neutrality doesn't mean that they're the main proponents for net neutrality. This is a grassroots issue that we've been fighting for. So you don't get to credit Google and Facebook as being the leading voices in the fight to save net neutrality, because that's inaccurate. And quite frankly, I don't care what Google or Facebook thinks. Our opinion is what matters, because we're supposed to be a democracy, not a fucking corporatocracy. Now, to be completely fair, not all coverage of net neutrality was atrocious. To her credit, Joy-Ann Reid actually did a great job covering the topic, and even Brett Baer of Fox News had a surprisingly objective take on the matter. But overall, most of the news shows that covered net neutrality were biased, and they just downright lied about the issue altogether. Now, I'm saying that because I actually took the time to go through and watch every single segment about net neutrality I could find after it was repealed. Now, the problem is that when these news shows don't cover the topic of net neutrality adequately, then that spreads even more misinformation than is already out there. And this, of course, benefits Ajit Pai, who gets to pretend that the topic is super complex and the meaning of net neutrality is amorphous. Well, it's easy to come to that conclusion if the media isn't doing its job and properly informing the public about an issue that will directly harm them. But I mean, since Fox News does the bidding of the Republican Party, who in turn does the bidding for their largest donors, which include ISPs, and of course, since MSNBC's parent company is against net neutrality, it's no wonder why the coverage of this issue has been so terrible. And again, of course, there were a couple of exceptions where pundits covered the topic sufficiently, and they did a good job explaining what's at stake. But overall, I'm not just talking about these pundits because I like to make fun of them, even though admittedly they are easy targets, but I'm talking about this because what they're doing is incredibly harmful. This is an issue that will affect every single American that uses the internet, and these cable news shows, I mean, they're tasked with a duty of educating the public, and they're not doing that, which is why every time they cover net neutrality, I feel compelled to come out and debunk any myths they try to spread about it. So if you watch anything regarding net neutrality in cable news, you have to be cognizant that they are most likely going to report it in a really misleading way. And again, that is so problematic. This segment of the Humanist Report was brought to you by 7coffeeroasters.com. They're a minority-owned small business in Seattle, and they specialize in roasting unique and delicious coffee that's not actually roasted until you've placed your order. And the best part is that they actually ship out all orders within 24 hours, so you get your coffee and it still tastes fresh when it arrives. And to boot, they're also a progressive company that pays their workers a living wage and actually cares about the country. So to support them and experience the deliciousness of their coffee, you can check out 7coffeeroasters.com.